Okay, today we are going to do the anatomy of the brain using both the half-head model and the three-dimensional model of the brain. So on the three-dimensional model, we have the outer layer is the cerebrum. For the cerebrum, we have the frontal lobe, which is in the front, the parietal lobe, which is the top side, the temporal lobe, which is the lower side, and the occipital lobe in the back. We also have some indentations. The large indentation separating the right and left halves of the brain is the longitudinal fissure. A smaller indentation separating the frontal from the parietal lobes is the central sulcus. On either side of the central sulcus we have a gyrus, which is a peak or a part where it lifts up, and that's the pre-central gyrus and the post-central gyrus in the front and in the back of the central sulcus. So pre-central gyrus is in the front of the central sulcus, post-central gyrus is in the back of the central sulcus. We also have a sulcus here separating the temporal lobe from the other lobes, and that is the lateral sulcus. And in the back, separating the cerebrum from this region back here, which is the cerebellum, we have the transverse fissure. From there, we can open up the brain to see the brain from a sagittal view. So the outer region of the brain, again, is the cerebrum. This large white region here, number 4, on the half-head model is the corpus callosum. Number 5 is a septum separating this center region of the brain from the lateral ventricle, and that is the septum pellucidum, number 5. Here, number 6 is the fornix, and from there you can see the lower structures of the brain. This blue structure here is the choroid plexus. This pink region back here, number 14, is the pineal gland. Number 8 here, this circular brown region, is the intermediate mass, which connects the right and left halves of the thalamus. So this circular region here, which is labeled number 10, is the thalamus, sitting just under the choroid plexus with its intermediate mass. Just below and in front of the thalamus is this region here, which is the hypothalamus, connected by a stalk called the infundibulum to number 16, which is the pituitary gland. In front of the hypothalamus also is where the optic nerve crosses, and that's number 15, the optic chiasm. Behind the pituitary, and there are 2 of them, one on each side, here we're just seeing one, number 17 is a mammillary body. From there we can move down into the brainstem. This region here is the midbrain. This circular region here, number 20, is the pons. And this lower region here, before you get down to the spinal cord, is the medulla oblongata. Surrounding the thalamus is the third ventricle. Connecting the third ventricle to this region here is the cerebral aqueduct, and this region, which would be surrounding the pons and the medulla, is the fourth ventricle. Those are spaces for cerebrospinal fluid. Behind the fourth ventricle you have again the cerebellum, where the white regions that look like a tree are the arbor vitae of the cerebellum. We can also look at the cerebellum in three-dimensional view at the back of the brain, where you can see the tiny folds of the cerebellum are the folia, and the place where the cerebellum comes together, the right and left halves, if you look very close you probably can't see it here, but it's letter A, that is the vermis of the cerebellum. It looks like a worm when you get closer and look inside the cerebellum. And then poking back underneath, there's your medulla oblongata, which you can find if you look towards the front of the brain. So if we look in three-dimensional view, we have the midbrain, just behind the pituitary gland, the pons, and the medulla. In front of the pituitary gland again is your optic chiasm. In front of the optic chiasm are your olfactory bulb and olfactory tract. Behind the pituitary, if you lift the pituitary up, then you can see that pair just underneath the two circular regions, the mammillary bodies.